Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriot's History. I'm Larry Schweikart, co-author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Patriot's History of the United States, now in its 40th printing, 5th edition. Of course, as always, I'm reading from the 15th anniversary edition. If you go to earlier editions, you can find it usually by the headers, but the page numbers may not line up quite as well. Of course, this is brought to you by the Wild World of History, and I have full curricula for U.S. and world history high schoolers that include me teaching all lessons, all 22 chapters of Patriot's History in high production video. Same thing with world history, all 15 units of world history, plus the regular rigmarole, you know, teacher's guides, student guides, tests, answer keys, and all the images that I use in teaching these lessons. Now, last time we just started with the Declaration of Independence. We got right up to the Declaration of Independence. And so I am going to be reading the Declaration itself today. Now, if you go to the Faith and Freedom Foundation, let me see if I can get you the website here. Try that. Nope, that's not it. Well, sorry, I'm not seeing it right now. There it is. There it is. Okay. So it's the Faith and Freedom Coalition, www.ffcdelaware.com/. That's Faith and Freedom Coalition, www.ffcdelaware.com/. The reason I'm giving you this website is they have a whole series on a course in American history and the documents, and it includes a number of people, obviously me, Ralph Reed, many other people, and we read and or discuss the major documents in American history. And in this series, I read in a much more highly produced setting, the Declaration. So I doubt seriously that you'll get too many more insights there on my Declaration reading than what I'm going to give you this morning, but it's worth checking it out. I also read and commented on the Bill of Rights and on 2 articles within the U.S. Constitution and on the Articles of Confederation. So I did 5 separate videos in this series that you might want to look at. Again, last time, www.ffcdelaware.com/. All right. So today I'm going to be reading from the Patriot's History Reader, where we have the Declaration of Independence, 1776. And here is the lead up, the introduction to the document. Almost a year after the first shots of the revolution were fired at Lexington, the Continental Congress took up the issue of declaring independence from Great Britain. The movement rode a tide of patriotism that grew following Parliament's passage of the Prohibitory Act in February, King George's hiring of mercenaries to help put down the rebellion, and widespread enthusiasm over Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which we read last time. Confusion reigned throughout the colonies as many, quote, declarations of independence were made at the local and state level. Congress moved forward by fits and starts, but finally passed a resolution resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. This resolution passed on July 2nd, 1776, the true Independence Day, as Franklin noted. Over the next 2 days, Congress reviewed Jefferson's draft declaration, made a few changes, and deleted a substantial portion that dealt with the slave trade. On July 4th, the wording was approved and sent out for publication. In a very large sense, the Declaration of Independence became the guiding light of the revolution, if not actually a literary representation of the soul of the American patriots. Although to some congressmen, Although some congressmen understood, quote, all men are created equal to mean, quote, there is no class of nobility, unquote, the Declaration was soon taken at face value and the conflict over slavery moved to center stage. That is, they took it seriously that all men were created equal. Abraham Lincoln would later tie the Declaration and the U.S. Constitution together, noting that the Constitution had to be, quote, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In other words, the Constitution by itself is not meaningful unless it is tied to a guiding principle, and that principle is that all men are created equal. Thus, the Radical Declaration, which severed ties with England and the, I would say, conservative Constitution, which ordered the affairs of the United States of America, were in his eyes, Lincoln's eyes, a single long document separated by 11 years. Whether or not the Declaration is the single most important document in history relating to governing human affairs is a question for the reader. Certainly, tyranny and freedom are explicitly defined, as are the causes for the separation and the contention that America had exhausted every nonviolent alternative. Ultimately, although a government may fail to fully implement and protect the great principles of liberty espoused here, in other words, just the Declaration itself didn't guarantee you had liberty, the Declaration still challenges the individual to do better and to defend the rights enunciated therein at every opportunity. All right. So let's get started. The Declaration of Independence. Again, Jefferson wrote this out of a 5-man committee that included Franklin, Sherman, but John Adams, but really it was Jefferson's draft. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. All right, so the first thing we note here, this is a statement to the world about the causes of independence, why we are seeking independence, okay? And he says it's only fitting that the laws of nature impel us to state this to the rest of the world. Second thing to notice, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. So in the very first sentence, the supposed deist, Thomas Jefferson, talks about God. He says, God's the one that gave us these natural rights. How about that? Okay. All right. Second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, obvious, that all men are created equal, not some men. What's all? How many are involved in all? All. I'm an all man. You're an all man. Whether you're man, woman, child, you're an all man. All men are created equal. I don't see a qualifier there. I don't see all white men, all able-bodied adults. I see all men are created equal. Now, does that mean equal in abilities? No, of course not. It means equal in terms of status before God and before the law. Or if you're a fan of the old Pink Panther movies, love the way he used to say the law. So we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. 2 sentences in, Jefferson, the deist, has now mentioned God twice. Doesn't sound like much of a deist to me. That among these, what these, Tom? What are the these that Tom is talking about? It's important, young people, when we read this, that you know what the pronouns and references are here. So the these here refers to certain inalienable rights. If I were you, I'd draw a small circle around these and tie it back to certain unalienable rights. And what are these certain unalienable rights? And note he says among these, it's not just these, it's not only these, it's among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, by which they all meant ownership of property. Second sentence, that to secure these rights, what rights? The rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Draw a circle around these rights and back to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That to preserve these rights, governments are instituted among men. Oh, wait a minute. So Jefferson says governments are created by men. That would mean they're artificial, i.e., they didn't exist naturally. Well, that's certainly in keeping with John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, right? We heard that in earlier lessons, that they believed government was artificial. It's created by man, all due to this kind of state of nature, right? Hobbes wanted to get out of the state of nature, so he created government. Locke wanted to get back to the state of nature, so he created government. But in each case, government was created, so it would mean that government is artificial. However, hang on, that whenever any form of government becomes, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving who's the governments, circle there back to government, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, what ends? So you got to keep going back and keeping in mind what is being discussed before. What ends? The protection, the securing of these rights, the rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, okay? Whenever any government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, government, wait for it, and to institute new government, laying the government's foundation on such principles. What principles? Protecting the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and organizing its powers. What's powers? The government's powers in such a form as to them. Who's the them? See, this can get really confusing. The people. As to them shall seem most likely to affect the people's safety and happiness. So let me kind of reread this by putting in the proper references here. That when any form of government becomes destructive of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish that government and to institute a new government, laying that new government's foundations on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and organizing that new government's powers in such form that as to the people, it would seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Okay? Now look at what Jefferson did. You abolished the government, but you established a new one. Why? Why? Because government is natural. As the Greeks said, it is man's telos. It's what we're here to do. Politics, which is to say, to organize our societies in a productive and beneficial manner. Okay? So whenever any government becomes destructive of the ends of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, you have the right to abolish it, but you have to create a new one. Why? Because it's natural. See, Jefferson did not really believe government was artificial. He really believes it is natural and given by God. Otherwise, he would have said it's your right to abolish it. You don't need government. And that's kind of where the modern day Libertarian Party is. You really don't need government. See, but that's not the case. It says that government is natural. And if you abolish a government, you got to replace it. Now, let me show you something. If you drop 10 people on a desert island, one of these survivor movies where a plane crashes and 10 people are left, They will organize themselves into a government. We might call it a body politic. It might be a democracy. They might agree to let one person be a dictator. They might elect 2 or 3 people to be an oligarchy. But whatever it is, they will form a government within 30 minutes. Because it's natural. It's what people do. All right. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and that accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Folks, you got to get this. Jefferson nails it. He says people are going to put up with a lot of crap for a very, very long time. He said it's going to get insufferable, where you can no longer put up with it. But until that time, they are going to put up with it. So you saw what we went through with the vax and the lockdowns, and people put up with it. Now, their reasoning was, well, if I don't, grandma will die and my kids will die. But after a while, they said, no, that's not happening. Enough is enough. And slowly but surely, we came out of the lockdowns, and individual state governors said, no, we're not going to do this. Individuals sooner than that said, I'm not wearing a stupid mask. All you maskiopaths. Okay. But here's the thing. You look at some place like California today, you go, what's wrong with those people? Why are they putting up with all this? Folks, they will put up with it and a lot more until it becomes insufferable, until they absolutely can't. Then they will either leave or fight. Those are the only, flight or fight, those are the only 2 options if you can't control the government and vote your way out of it. So this is a warning to us. The danger is that you get to a point like Nazi Germany, which voted Hitler into office. Now, I know the debate that the Nazis never won a majority of the popular vote, but they did get 44%, and the Nationalist Party got 8%, and that gave them a majority coalition government. But you get to a point, even with free elections, where you can vote yourself into tyranny. Now, we're going to have a discussion later on about whether or not that is really allowable. Can a free people really be allowed to vote themselves into tyranny? And some people say, well, of course they have to because they're free. And others will say, no, that's not a component of liberty. You're not allowed to do that because it affects other generations who have no vote. Therefore, you can never vote yourself into slavery. But the whole idea here is that there are times where society slips to the point where you no longer have a choice. You no longer can say, well, this is insufferable. I'm reacting. What is that point? I don't know. How close are we? I don't know. But it is a reality. It is coming. Okay. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object, that is, when you can show that this is an incompetence, that it's deliberate, which I might argue is the case today, evinces a design to reduce them, the people, under absolute despotism, it is their right, the people's right, it is their duty, the people's duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for future security. There it is again. You can't just get rid of government. You have to create a new government that's safe and effective. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. That history, the present King of Great Britain, is the history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And so Jefferson says, all right, enough talk. Here are the facts. And we're going to let all you people in the rest of the world judge whether or not we're right or not in this. He, the King of England, has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. So colonies would pass laws, king would not give his assent to them, and thus they would be null and void. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he is utterly neglected to attend to them. So he would say, well, I'll get to it sometime, but he would delay his assent. And meanwhile, bad stuff is happening. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation. The legislature, a right inestimable, it's hard to say, inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. In other words, there were people in Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania who were moving westward, and they needed to create new districts that would have representation, and the king wasn't creating those districts, thereby depriving them of representation. And we're going to see that the most important law in American history, according to me, is the Land Ordinance of 1785 that said right off the bat, all you people moving out into these new areas, we're going to count you. And once you reach a certain number, we're going to allow you to apply for citizenship to be our equals. It's absolutely unbelievable, but we'll get to that. He's called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them, the people, into compliance with his measures. In other words, he said, yeah, you can set up a legislature, but you got to set it up in Pig's Knuckle, Arkansas. And it might be a 10-day journey from the cities or whatnot. And the purpose there is to make it so far away, it's so hard to get to, that nobody's really going to attend a legislative meeting, and therefore he gets to rule like a tyrant. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions of the rights of people. So if you disagreed with the king, he'd dissolve you. He's refused for a long time, either after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. So basically, when the king wouldn't allow these bodies to meet and pass laws, it risked them being invaded by Indians or revolts or revolutions within the society itself. He's endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising conditions of new appropriations of lands. Now, today, we have such a massive invasion of illegal criminal foreigners that this seems ridiculous. But at the time, the colonies weren't highly populated, and they were encouraging people to move in and become British subjects in these colonies, and the king wasn't allowing that because he feared they would get too big and too powerful. He's obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He wasn't allowing courts to be created. He's made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. So rather than being paid by the people, judges were going to be paid by the crown. He's erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Boy, does that sound like America today. Swarms of these officers. Now, there's some things you can get done fairly quickly, right? You can get your car registered in Arizona and in Ohio. It was a two-step process. You get the EPA check that says your car isn't a smoking hulk, and then you apply for your registration. Usually you get it within 15 or 20 days. It's not a big deal. But if you want to start a business, it's a little harder. If you want to go into certain types of businesses like food, it's even harder. If you want to get a hairdresser's license, you have to pass all these tests. They erect barriers to keep you out of business or to make it more difficult for you to build, create, design stuff. Okay. Now, it's nowhere near what it is in the rest of the world, but it is still these swarms of officers who eat out your substance. Just recently, we tried to get a special type of trust set up for my mother-in-law, and the steps we had to go through were unimaginable. It was just horrendous. So this is what's meant by these multitude of officers, and they're talking about it in the 1770s. He is kept among us in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislature. He put redcoats in the cities. He is affected to render military independent of and superior to civil power. So the redcoats weren't responsible to civil courts if they killed somebody. He's combined with others to subject us to a foreign jurisdiction, to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. We didn't even have a Constitution, did we? And unacknowledged by our laws, giving assent to their acts of pretended legislation. What are they talking about here? The Quebec Act, basically transferring over authority over the British American colonies to Quebec and Canada. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, the Quartering Act. For protecting them, the large bodies of troops, by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So if soldiers killed somebody, as they did in the Boston Massacre, they would be protected by mock trial. Now, in this case, it was a real trial, and John Adams, as we saw, defended these soldiers and proved that they were innocent of firing the first shots. For cutting off our trade with parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Wow, do you notice that? This is number 12, 13, 14 in the list of grievances. Taxation without representation. So it wasn't the only cause of the revolution. It was a cause, and it was buried down among all the others. For depriving us in many cases of benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. So again, the claim here was that if you committed a crime against the king here, say in Delaware, you'd be shipped off to England to stand trial, where you cannot get a trial of your peers, a jury of your peers. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, that would be Canada, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries through the Quebec Act, as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies. So you're giving them the authority to be tyrants over us. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. That's the first time they say he's really engaged in war against us. He's plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun, with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. Here they're talking about the Hessians. He's already shipped the Hessians over, foreign mercenaries, to attack British citizens. He's excited domestic insurrections among us. That would be the Indians, and kind of reference, an oblique reference to slave revolts, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is indistinguishable destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we petition for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have gone answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So we've gone to this guy over and over again and said, "Oh, king, help us out here. Listen to us." And he said, gave them the middle finger, right? Nor have we been wanting in attention to our British brethren. We warn them from time to time of attempts by their legislature that would be Parliament, to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We've reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration settlement here. We've appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. We have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connection and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, Parliament, the British people, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. So he's saying, look, we haven't just gone to the king. We've appealed to Parliament. We've appealed to the British people themselves. He said, we came from you guys. We're your aunts, your uncles, your nephews, your nieces, your brothers, your sisters. What's wrong with you? And they didn't listen to us either. And he says, okay, we're going to treat you in war as enemies, but in peace as friends. What do you want to be? We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, note that he said that. The representatives of the United States of America, the representatives of the United States of America, not the colonies, the representatives. Earlier, he talked about one people to dissolve the bands which connected them to another people, not colonies that connected him to the Great Britain, one people. Okay. And here we have the representatives of the United States in General Congress assembled appealing to the Supreme Judge. Nowhere in there is mentioned colonies. It doesn't say the colonies declared this. It said the representatives of the United Congress appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, there's God again, for the rectitude of our intentions, due in the name of and by the authority of, wait for it, the good people of these colonies, not by the authority of the colonies, by the authority of the people. Why did I harp on this? Because there is a thread out there of thought that says that it was the colonies or the states that created the Union. No, 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 no. Jefferson says it 3 times in the Declaration. It is the people, the people, the people, the people. Lincoln says it later. It is the people, of the people, for the people, by the people. It's the people. We do, in the name of and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts which and things which independent states may do, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, there's God number 4, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. So it's important that you get that. The enabling mechanism was the people. The people enabled the mechanism of Congress and the colonies, but the people were the authority, not the colonies or Congress. Second, we mutually pledge our lives, our fortune, our sacred honor. This was a huge deal. Every single man who signed that declaration basically went on the FBI most wanted list as a terrorist to be shot on sight. Okay. Anyone who was captured in that list would be tried and hanged for treason. If they were lucky, they would only be hanged. They wouldn't be drawn and quartered, as was William Wallace. Their families, if their families were captured, they would be imprisoned. Any lands that they had were fair game to be taken up by the crown and sold off or destroyed. And we will see next time when I'm going to read from Rush Limbaugh's The Men Who Risked Everything, what happened to these incredible founders, these signers of the Declaration. Almost every single one paid a huge personal price for putting his name on that document. And John Hancock, who was reluctant at first to declare independence, he fought it for quite a while, but he finally said, I'm going to sign in a signature so big, the king won't need his reading glasses to know what I wrote. In other words, when he wrote John Hancock, the king could see it was his name without even putting on his glasses. So that's our great declaration, folks. It's astounding. Again, if you want to see a slightly different take, but same basic principles, go to www.ffc.delaware.com/ and mine is the Declaration episode. And you can see all the other videos there too. They're all very good. All right, this has been brought to you by Wild World of History. Make sure you check out all the stuff there. Just in, I'm adding a brand new series on both Wild World History and Wild World of Politics called Integrity. And we're going to start with Winston Churchill. So the first lesson series under Integrity is going to be Winston Churchill, and those will start going up today. Also, look at the Buy Larry a Coffee button. Watch the trailer to make Patriot's history into a video, folks. I need your help to do this. Just buy me 1 coffee or 2 or 10. But we need to turn this into a video like John Adams, like Sons of Liberty, like The Chosen. I need your help to do this. So check it out. And I will see you guys back here on Friday.